All right, well, welcome to tonight's CBOC meeting for Measure S and Measure T. Let's start with a roll call. Olivia, I always turn to you, so you have an opportunity to speak during the meeting.
Present. Carolyn Chow. Jennifer Dewey. Present. Paul Landry.
Present.
Present.
Jacqueline Rodriguez.
Here.
Great. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people present. So we have a quorum to move forward. Carolyn Chow submitted her resignation back in July. So we're down to 6 seated members on the committee, and we have all 6 here this evening. I think we have, let me look ahead on the agenda. Yeah, we have 5, 6 about filling vacant positions, so we can talk about that when we get to it. So welcome everyone. Just as a reminder, Citizens Bond Oversight Committee and our responsibilities now include looking at Measure T that we've been working on for years and Measure S. Got a great agenda this evening. We always welcome public participation and comment during the public comment section or during any of the items on the agenda. With that, let's get started. Any changes to the agenda from committee members or anyone else? Okay, that was 2.1. Do we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Janet, thank you. Second for me. Carl, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, agenda is approved. Section 3.1. At this time, we'll take any public comment. I don't see anybody here. Is there anyone on the Zoom? Nobody with their hand raised. Okay, excellent. All right, well, once again, if anyone from the public joins or is on and wants to comment as we go through, we always welcome the input. Okay, let's move into our action item section 4 then. And we have section 4.1, which is approval of the minutes from the June 17th meeting. Any discussion on the minutes from our last meeting? Nothing? Okay. Motion to approve. Thank you, Jen. Jit Paul. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Minutes from the last meeting approved and will be posted on the district website in the CBOC section. Okay, we've got 2 items now that are very similar. These are the annual reports. This is probably our most important duty, is to produce this report annually. And tonight we're reviewing 2 reports for the fiscal 22-23 year. As a reminder, that's not the year that just closed at the end of June, but the one before it. And so we've got 2 reports, one for T, which has a lot more information in it. Also one for S, which has less, because the only thing that happened in S in that fiscal period was essentially the voters approved it and the first tranche of bonds were sold. So let's turn our attention to 4.2, which is the annual report for Measure T. And we'll open up for commentary, discussion on that one.
I have some comments here. Scrolling down to the numbers. And part of this is just to have conversation to get clarification on the numbers.
Oh, and just before you hold that thought for 1 sec, I just want to say that I wrote the reports. And I am very likely to make mistakes. And so if you catch mistakes in here, we'll catch them, we'll get them corrected. And if we still think that with those corrections, these are good reports, we can approve them tonight, we'll make the corrections, and then we can post the reports. So Jen, fire away.
In the bond financial summary, so in the PDF,
Sorry, I should have page numbers on this.
Or- First comment, we need page numbers.
We need page numbers, okay?
But the total bond program revenues listed as 203 million on the page. I don't think that includes all Prop 39 interest and impact fees. Because the 10 million is only the impact fee or part of it, but I think the total is closer to 215.
Let's take a look at, so there are attachments, as you know. And so we could refer to attachment, I think attachment B is the income and expense summary sheet. This is what I used. It's called attachment B. So Erica, you can correct any numbers that are wrong.
I don't think that all the revenues, there's like a total line for revenues on it, so that was like kind of the part you couldn't understand. But if the total expenditures are 211, like that wouldn't work for 203 as the revenue. But I think if you add up the revenues from each group, it's closer to 2.
So here we're talking about the table at the bottom of page 4, which wraps onto the next page, right? Is, so that top section represents the whole program. So let's check our math here. So 193 is the right number, right? For the total amount. And then if I look at the top of, sorry, not projecting here, but attachment B in the upper right corner, you see 203,000 in revenues for the Measure T Fund 21 all the way at the upper right.
Then
So it's 200, so 193, 203 total revenue minus 193 bond leaves 10 million.
for that fiscal year, but if we're doing the total over the entire length of the project.
Isn't that the far right column though, the total over the whole project?
Yes.
211.4.
Expenditures. But revenues would be, you'd have to take the total revenues from Prop 39, that's just over 2 million in the yellow box. And the total revenues of Fund 25 impact fees, 10.75.
So one point of clarification, I'm only referring to the Measure T Fund 21. I'm not including Fund 1 and impact fees. Because my understanding is is that part of the bond program? It's not part of the total, it's not, those are additional programs that are used to fund bond related programs, but they're not bond money, correct?
Correct.
So how is total expenditures 211 million, but 203 is our max?
Yes, very good point. I think this is where I may have messed up because the 211, you're right, includes those other funds, but the revenue line does not. So I guess we need to make those match. Good catch. So do we want to have the revenue and expense be the total program under Measure T? And if so, then we would change the revenue to what is the total revenue, Erica? It's not calculated. So it's 203 plus 2 million makes 205 plus call it 11. Makes 216. Is my math correct? Okay. So if we want to be correct, then Jen, that would be
258.
okay, and I'm rounding up here, so 216. And what was the total revenue then? It was 13 rounded. Interest impact fees. Okay, great.
All of those.
Oh, it is 23. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. 23. Is that right, Erica? Okay. bonds issued 193. So the corrected table will read bonds authorized 193, bonds issued 193,
Yeah.
additional funding sources 23, total 216. Okay,
Then just change the narrative above, to reflect those numbers above, instead of 10,023, 7,203, 216.
okay, 23 in miscellaneous revenue, total for use to 216. Good call. Okay. So this was correcting, I'm just going to make notes so that we can make sure we get it right in the minutes, correcting the bond financial summary copy and table. Okay, was there anything else in that section?
I just want to make sure that.
Okay.
Page. The program. The start of year, all those accumulations, that 4.2 balance. Like that just needs to be accurate. If you take that 216 and subtract the 4.2. To be what it was at the start of the year.
So which number are you referring to? This,
0.1
okay. Was Erica, is that the correct bond program balance at the start of the fiscal year? The,
That's the spend, right?
That's a spend.
yeah, so what was the,
balance.
so the first line is the bond program balance at the start of the fiscal year. I have 20.1.
Or if we just take the decimals off, it works.
Okay.
The 28 minus the 4 and you have your 16 spend.
The audit has the fund balance beginning 18.6 million. And then ending balance 3.35.
So once again, the question is, does that include the Fund 1 and the impact and Fund 25, or is that just Fund 21? So how about this? I mean, one way we can expedite this is if I just work with Erica to get the right numbers in here. Are we comfortable with that? Okay.
Yes.
The 102,808. The correct, balance.
At the start of that fiscal year, there was 200 million in the fund? No.
The new revenue. The new revenue. 260.
The 262,000 was the revenue in during the period, correct? Right. And the spend during the year was 16.2 million. And the fund bond program balance at the end of the period. I see it as 4.2 million.
I can help.
Okay.
This is, I'm not very good at correcting numbers in a public forum, but so I can assist in getting the numbers coordinated.
Yeah, if we just refine those so they match all the reports, then.
Okay, so table rows. Are we okay with the cumulative bonds program spend at the start of the fiscal year was 195 and it ended the year at 211.4, the difference being the 16.2 that was spent and the revenue less the revenue that came in. Okay. Just making a note here and 3 rows below that. Okay, so we'll work to get those corrected. Jen, please continue.
That was it.
Okay, that was it. That's all you have. Okay. Anyone else have any questions, comments, or corrections on the Measure T report?
Nice report.
Oh, it needs a date.
Yes. Which will, if we approve it, we'll make it tonight's date. So date entered at top of the letter. Okay, good catch. So just a couple of additions from the previous year's report to point out, if you didn't catch it. One, during this period, we started looking at the new project list, the no bid contract list, and the change order list. So those three for the full fiscal period are attached. You probably saw those. And I refer to that in the CBOC findings section, which is the page right before the pictures, that we started reviewing that additional information, and the attachments are available. If you look at attachment E, here's my so attachment E is the no bid contracts. So we list all of the no bid contracts, and on the last page of that attachment, I put a table that summarizes by vendor, so you can see the total roll up. So for example, Dryco got $375,000 in no bid contracts, which it's harder to see when it just lists them individually. What I felt was missing from that summary table was the number of contracts that each vendor was received. So I'm going to pass this around. I've added a column that counts the number of contracts. So for example, Dryco got 17 contracts during the fiscal year that totaled $375,000 without having to bid for any of that work. So I'll pass this around just so if you guys are okay with adding that column to the table. I'll just make a note to update the attachment.
Yeah, I think it's important to include the number of contracts, because otherwise it looks like one big number and it was never
check.
one. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so that's attachment. No bid is attachment E. Okay. The same then, if you look at attachment F, the final attachment is the change order listing for the fiscal period. Once again, it lists them all individually. There is a table that summarizes the vendors, and all I've done in this revision is to add the number of change orders in addition to the amount. So then the Rodan Builders was 623,000 in change orders. You'll now see that that was made up of 8 change orders. So if you want to just pass that around, you can see how the table just adds one column that counts up the number of change orders. And so my suggestion is that we just add those columns to each of those 2 attachments.
That makes sense.
Carl, just to see what the change is there. Okay. Any other comments or corrections on the report?
Nice report.
Yeah, well done.
Nice report.
That was a lot.
It's a lot of work.
Okay, so let me just list out the changes that we just discussed, and then we can have an emotion, if there is a motion, to approve the report with these changes. So first was add page numbers. Second, correct the bond financial summary table. So the first few rows I've already corrected. We got those correct, and that includes all of the programs. And then I will work with the district, and Carl has volunteered to make sure the rest of the rows in that table are correct. And we'll have the right numbers in there. We'll obviously fix the date at the top, which will be tonight's date if we approve it. And then I'll update attachments E and F, the summary tables with the count of either the no bid contracts or the change orders. So with those changes, is there a motion to approve the Measure T report?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Measure T report is approved with those changes. Let's move on then to item 4.3, which is the Measure S report. As you'll see in the Measure S report, there's some placeholders for things that will occur in future periods. I just left them in there so that anyone reading this would know what kinds of things we will be tracking going forward, but weren't applicable because no projects were authorized and nothing was spent other than the cost of issuing the bonds themselves. So obviously here we need to fix the date at the top again. We'll put the page numbers in. Any comments, questions, or corrections on the Measure S report?
I have a couple on that same financial summary.
Okay. Did I make mistakes on that one too? Probably.
This was just, I think numbers for Measure T got pulled in.
Oh. Are we talking about the copy or the table? Did I forget to? The narrative and the table. Okay, so walk me through which ones need to get fixed, if you don't mind.
Sure. Voters approved 193 million. Under Measure S, that was T.
Voters approved, yes, sorry, 298. Okay, that's corrected.
Second.
And all bonds were sold. No, wait a minute. Okay, I just forgot. You're right. I forgot to update the copy here. So it should say voters approved 298 million in bonds under Measure S and 90 million, right, of bonds were sold in this period.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, in this fiscal period. Okay,
That's the end.
and then that's the end of the sentence. And then we don't, there was 20,000 in in interest. But we can just skip that, I think, is your point. It's in material. Okay. Okay, so I've adjusted the first sentence under bond financial summary now reads, voters approved 298 million in bonds under Measure S and 90 million of bonds were sold in this fiscal period. We don't need the majority. You're right. I just missed this whole section. Thank you. We should just say project spending during the period totaled 0, right? Or just say there was no project spending in this period. During the period. Okay, got it. Now, is the table correct? I think the table's right.
Program spend. What, 450,000?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Rick, do we consider the 450,000 to be bond program spend? I mean, it was taken from the proceeds, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to account for dollars. I would put that in there.
Okay,
Listed this year as
Yeah.
issuance costs.
okay. So, what I've,
And it also reflected as 0.45 million.
yeah, I got it. Okay, so that second part of the table now reads bond program balance at start of fiscal year 0, new revenue 90.02. There was a little bit of interest. Then bond program spend, and I put in parentheses issuance costs, is 0.45 million, otherwise known as 450K. And then I didn't change, 89.6 is correct. And then the next row, cumulative bond program spend at start is 0. And then cumulative bond program spend at the end of the fiscal year was the 0.45 again.
Yeah.
Okay. Bond financial summary. Copy and table corrected. Okay, got it. Any other changes?
Maybe not on the next page under the committee membership. And
Yes.
fill our names. Did the committee have 9 seated members and 1 vacant position?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and a vacancy.
So just update the 8 to a 10.
At the end of,
Oh, it's
At 8 seated at the end of 20.
resigned from the committee, so that, you're right, that should be 9, correct? So we started with 10 and a vacancy. And then Raquel Gonzalez resigned. So at the end of the period, the committee had 9 seated members and 1 vacant position. Let me just also correct that in Measure T then, because it was probably the same. Good catch. Yes. It's the same committee, so it's the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minus 1 is 9. Okay, I corrected in both places. Number of, I don't know if we have to re-vote or if we just call that a typographical correction on the Measure T report. Eight to 9. Okay. Any other changes?
I would change, I had a question regarding the, just the bonds issuance cost.
Mm.
I was just curious if that was for the 90 million or was that for the total? Like, will you incur those costs again every time? That was for the 90 million. Will you have to pay Moody's 61,005 every time for the getting a rating?
Invest in Moody's, Jit Paul. Okay, any other, if not, is there a motion to approve? Let me just summarize the changes and then we can get the motion. The changes are fix the date at the top, add page numbers. The bond financial summary table or section, we've fixed the copy and we fixed the table numbers. And then we've corrected the number of committee members at the end of the period. It was listed as 8, it was actually 9. Okay, with those changes, is there a motion to approve the Measure S report? Thank you, Jit Paul.
Second.
Janet, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Measure S report is approved with the edits that we reviewed. We'll make those changes and get it to the district for posting. Thank you, everyone. That takes us into section 5. And 5.1 is a topic, district council versus independent council for the CBOC. And just as a refresher, you recall that Cameron Hoffman, who was a previous member, wrote up her thoughts on the topic. She was an ad hoc subcommittee chartered to go off and research this topic. She did. She came back with her findings and recommendations. We had some discussion on it at the last meeting. We wanted and then to get input from the district's council on the topic, and we have that presentation this evening.
Here tonight, William Tunick from BWK our district council is here to discuss this with the committee. With that, I'll turn it over to William.
William, thank you for coming.
There you go. Figured out the hard part. So there we go. So good evening. As CBOC mentioned, my name is William Tunick. I'm attorney with DWK. I work with the district on a variety of issues, actually a variety of districts, including on CBOCs. And so I know there had been a question, and we actually have seen this question from CBOCs at other districts as well, as far as legal counsel for CBOCs independent of district legal counsel. And so I want to just kind of talk to you a little bit about when we've looked at it from our analysis and why we've come to the conclusion we have, and then happy to answer any questions on it as well. The first place, obviously, when we have a question like this, we start by looking at the statute. So looking at the education code provisions that require CBOCs, what do they say about this, if anything? And the short answer is they don't. What the CBOC statute does talk about, obviously, is the duties of the CBOC. It talks about different types of activities that CBOCs may engage in order to fulfill those duties. The closest it gets is talking about technical assistance to be provided by the district. That's in 15280. But it doesn't specifically call out legal counsel, or even, actually, I don't think the word legal shows up anywhere in the CBOC statutes at all. And that's in contrast with, if you look other places in the ed code, when you talk about school districts, other legal entities that exist across the state. For the most part, when the legislature, whoever's drafting the statute, in this case it was the voters, want an entity to be able to have legal counsel, it's going to get called out in the statute. So school districts specifically can do it. Also, the things you usually see if a entity is going to have independent legal counsel is that it exists as a legal entity, independent from any other body, the ability to sue or be sued, as well as an independent source of funding. Those would be the types of things that you would usually associate with an entity that had its own legal counsel. And again, for CBOCs, you don't see any of those things present. So that all of those things are suggesting that it wasn't contemplated by the statute when it was enacted by the voters. The other piece of that is looking a little bit at what the duties of the and actually let me just stop and say one thing. I mentioned the technical assistance piece. I know that's been a question, as well as that include legal assistance. And I think it does to some extent. For example, when the district is helping the CBOC post agendas, conduct meetings, there's going to be questions about the Brown Act, for example. That would be a place where the district would be providing technical assistance that would have a legal perspective to it, I guess you could say, as far as the operation of the CBOC. But that's, again, the district providing technical assistance from its legal counsel. In a lot of ways, the same way that when you have questions about expenditures or the bond program and you're looking for technical assistance, that is also going to be coming from district staff. So a little bit of a parallel there. But the second thing also that we took a look at is what are the duties of a CBOC, right? So the CBOC's duties are to inform the public concerning the expenditure of bond funds. Again, as I mentioned, the word legal does not show up in these statutes. So the CBOC statutes don't talk about the CBOC making legal determinations per se. And I think it's kind of interesting because if you look at the statute structure, there's another article of this same chapter that's right above the part that talks about CBOCs, and that's the part that talks about taxpayer actions. And so there's actually an entire separate part of the code that talks about if there's a legal question to be determined, that a taxpayer can bring a challenge to a court, and the court is the one that makes essentially a binding legal determination. So the voters adopted that and the CBOC statutes at the same time. And there seems to be a pretty big distinction between the idea that legal issues go to the court, non-legal issues are what the CBOC is concerned in. So that also suggests that the need for independent legal counsel wouldn't be there, because that's not really within the duties of what the CBOC would be looking at. And then the last thing, and this is more a question about even if it's possible, is that as attorneys, we're subject to rules, professional rules of conduct as far as how we operate, and duties of loyalty and confidentiality to clients. Those get really tricky, if not kind of impossible to pull off, where when an attorney is being paid by one entity and has a client as a different entity, and those two entities may or not have interests that align, there becomes an ethical problem for the attorney as far as how to make that work. And sometimes you can't make it work. So that's the other thing that would suggest that where you have, again, a group that isn't an independent entity, doesn't have its own independent funding source, that it isn't really possible to have the district paying for quote unquote independent counsel, because you'd run into that ethical problem that the attorney would be placed in. So, again, we've looked at this several times. Every time we kind of come back to the same place, which is, all of those reasons suggest that there really isn't provision, and maybe couldn't be a situation where you'd have independent legal counsel for CBOC, but really the place of the attorney when it comes to CBOC is through that technical assistance provided by the district, if there's kind of legal technical assistance type questions. So that's sort of how we've come at it and looked at it for a few districts, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
So I guess I need clarification on your last statement. So, excuse me, are you saying that it's a good thing or not a good thing to have one representation for the district and CBOC? I didn't quite understand.
So, yeah, and let me actually make sure I use the right word. So the representation is of the district, to be
Got it.
clear. So the client, so my client or our client as a firm is always going to be the district. The board gives us direction. That's who our client is. What I'm saying is that we could not, I don't think that the statutes or even the rules of responsibility allow us to be paid by the district and quote unquote represent the CBOC, if that makes sense. Like, I think that the idea that there would be an independent duty to the CBOC separate than the district is I think,
Are you saying that for you specifically, your firm, or for any firm being paid by the district but representing the CBOC is an issue?
yes, because I'm saying that the rules of professional responsibility, I mean, it's similar situation you run into with, for example, insurance companies, where if you're being paid by a third party and representing, to represent another client and their interests don't align, then that, whether or not you represent the other, the district in the first place, you can run into an issue there. And additional, besides that, the first 2 points that I mentioned about the idea that there isn't really contemplation for the CBOC to have independent counsel in the first place would hold regardless. Sorry.
Thank you for all that. That was great. I guess the question I would have for you is now that you've.
Sorry.
Okay, much better. So now that we've heard why we should not have independent counsel, where is it that people point to that states that we should, I guess? I'm just curious.
Well, I've heard a couple things. I think I've heard a couple arguments. One, the technical assistance argument, right? That the statute talks about providing technical assistance. That must mean an attorney. I think we talked a little bit about why I don't know if that actually plays out. Two, I think I've heard comments from CBOC saying, well, we have to make legal determinations. How are we going to do that without our own attorney? And again, I think when we look at the duty of what the CBOC is, I think that's different. I think that ultimately is for a court to do. And then the third thing that I've heard, and I think this committee's heard as well, is there are CBOCs out there that have attorneys. So I know, I think West Contra Costa maybe is one that gets raised. LAUSD is another one. I think the response to that is just because another district does it, doesn't make it legal. I also tend to kind of put LAUSD in a separate world when it comes to most everything. But, I think that the only other situation, and I don't know in those two districts specifically, if the bond measure itself said something different specific to that, I think that could alter the analysis perhaps, but otherwise we're kind of looking at what we've got in the ed code, and that's where we come down.
So I will add to that. Are you familiar with the California Association of
Yes.
Bond Oversight Committees?
Yeah, CalBOC, yeah.
Which I believe is the only independent body that's helping advise CBOCs on best practices. They recommend it.
Yeah.
So to say that nobody recommends it would not be correct.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say, if I said nobody recommends it, I don't mean that. but-
Okay.
So to that point, they not only recommend it, they scream it. That's like the first thing that comes out. So then I'm not sure you can answer this question, but we have sat in this room and we have been explained to why we are out of compliance, why we are in a libelous situation where we could be sued as members of this bond measure oversight because of that we don't have independent. And the other part of my question is an independent counsel comes out of the bond money then too, correct? I mean, if we got our own independent counsel, would that be an expenditure to the bond?
Well,
Yeah, that I'm not 100% sure about. I think it's still technically district funds.
So it would
funds
come out
under
of
the
just-
technical support. It's a 1-for-1, right? We can pay an hour of his
Yeah,
time to come.
yes,
and
yes.
We can pay somebody
yes.
else's an hour. of time
I'm
to
just,
come.
yeah, okay.
But sorry, I didn't want to answer your first
No,
question.
go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I disagree whether or not the CBOC itself could actually be sued because that's a different issue. But I'd also point out your bylaws say, and I think they're just reflecting what the law requires, is that the district's insurance covers the CBOC and its members, and also there's a duty to defend in there. So anything you do in your official capacity, almost like the Board of Trustees, same thing. The districts, I mean, per the bylaws, you've got insurance and defense there. I mean, it's in a lot of ways similar to, districts will have LCAP committees or something else that's required by law to exist and be sort of run by the district, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's still within that district umbrella.
I think maybe a hypothetical here would be great for exploring this. So let's
Yep.
say the district goes to, you're the council for the district.
Mhm.
The district decides that they want to build something. They go to you and say, is this legal under the bond, the Constitution and Ed Code? Your advice is it is.
Mhm.
Okay. Then it comes before the CBOC and we look at that and we say, we don't think that that's legal. So we need to put that in our report to the
Mhm.
taxpayers that it is not a legal bond expense. But we want legal counsel on that question. We would go to you. Your duty is to the district. You've already told them it is.
Mhm.
So how would you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think actually what you said in the middle of that hypothetical is sort of where I would end it in some respects, which is that if ultimately the CBOC doesn't agree and thinks something falls outside of the measure language, that's the information that gets reported to the public. Because again, the duty of the CBOC isn't so much to make a legal determination as it's to report whatever its review of that information is. I think if
But if we needed some advice, because we're not attorneys in interpreting the Ed Code or the ballot measure or the Constitution, wherever, where would we go for that advice?
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is I think your district council would come and explain whatever their opinion is, kind of what I'm doing tonight. Or ultimately, again, I'm not sure that the CBOC's duty includes doing a full-blown legal analysis of the question or not. Ultimately, if you disagree that something is within the measure, you say that in the report. If you think it's within the measure, you say that. Because otherwise, I think it starts to turn the CBOC into sort of a semi-judiciary body, making legal determinations one way or the other, and then,
But isn't bond oversight specifically a legal requirement?
I think that if you look at the way that statute's set up, they talk about taxpayer actions, and it's very specific. If a taxpayer thinks that money should not be spent on something under the bond, you go to court, well, I guess over that direction, and the judge makes that decision. If the CBOC believes, for whatever reason, whether it's legal or otherwise, that an expenditure was not proper, that's information that gets reported to the public. And I think to me, that's how you drive those two, because
How would the committee in this hypothetical decide that it was not legal? They might seek advice.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is
Where would you suggest they get the legal advice from?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is ultimately, I don't think you have to seek that advice to fulfill the duties of the CBOC. Maybe that's where
So if a majority of the members think it's improper, just vote on it and that's good enough?
Yeah, exactly. And report that to the public.
So if I can add to that, then in that case, and I agree, I agree with that direction. Then it would be up to the voters to say, whoa, this is what was reported. It wasn't that the bond oversight committee even reported out. They could take it to court.
Mhm.
Then the community who voted for this are the ones that could take it to court. Our job is just to report out what is done, but not necessarily to stop it after it's done, if
I'm
he's
not
already made the
talking about
decision.
stopping. I'm talking about getting legal advice on what we would write in the
I'm
report.
not sure I have to agree. I'm not sure we need that legal advice. I don't see where we would need that legal advice.
It's almost like we would take on liability if we needed to take that step.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll just, if I can, real quickly, I mean, just an experience from another CBOC where they had attorneys in the community, and essentially it turned into like if you've seen an appellate hearing, the two attorneys in front of their podiums and 5 or 6 people in front of them, and they're deciding which of the 2 attorneys they agree with. I don't know that that's really what the CBOC was intended to do, to be perfectly honest. And so I think that's how a lot of the answer to the question, if that helps.
So again, I think this just goes back to really quickly. If we find an impropriety in spending, $500 hammers, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
you know, Heinz ketchup taste, testing that was supposed to, that's outrageously cost prohibitive. And we see it, we write it in our report. Taxpayer X reads the report, decides to says that, well, there's an impropriety. They're not necessarily coming after the CBOC
Mm-mm.
at all. You're saying that you yourself also mentioned a conflict, right? You kind of can't do representation. Carl's also saying by CBOC, bylaws, we're told to seek legal counsel. So that's kind of the gray area I think that everybody's having. Is like, where is that little boundary stop where, okay, if that person sues the district, yeah, we've stated $500 hammers were purchased. It's in our report. We submit it. Carl's asking, do we need to seek legal counsel? Are we under, so we're not necessarily under any statute or any kind of legal piece of it, except a witness in this case of a maybe possible impropriety. Is that how we'd be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, you'd have no role in that. I mean, to be honest, the role that the CBOC would have in that situation is when that person filed the lawsuit, your report's going to be exhibit A on the back of that lawsuit. And they're
Okay.
going to go to court and they're going to say, look, the Citizens Oversight Committee found this illegal expenditure in court. You need to fix this.
Okay.
And and then the district would be the one defending it. And their counsel, the CBOC, would not be.
I think the question is, you just used the word illegal.
Mhm.
How would the committee know whether it's legal or illegal?
So that's the question, I think. So at the end of
Yeah,
the day,
yeah.
the question is, if the CBOC bylaws are saying seek independent legal counsel, is that strictly for, do you think that was written as just for technicalities, like you mentioned? Technical advice, sort of like asking, the accounting team whether numbers are accurate or,
Yeah, yeah, and so just to interrupt, so when you were talking about the bylaws, I think you're talking the CalBach bylaws.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Calvin,
And-
yes, sir.
Yeah, and I couldn't necessarily speak to the intent there, but I think that, yeah, if in my view, the way that it would work, if the CBOC has a legal question, I've talked to lots of CBOCs about expenditures, district council would come in and say, look, this is how we think it's legal, A, B, C, and D, whatever, kind of like what I did tonight. If the CBOC isn't buying it, then I think in the report, it's, the district did this, we think it's illegal because it doesn't, we read the measure to say you could spend money on A, B, C, and D, and we don't think this expenditure falls within A, B, C, and D.
Okay, and then if we find out company X did something illegal by slipping in $500 hammers into the PO that was issued out to the district, and taxpayer Y does some, hardcore accounting lookups on all these expenditures and finds this discrepancy and it goes to court, you are then defending just the district and the
Yes.
CBOC is completely eliminated.
Yeah,
from
yeah.
any
I
kind of-
think
Yeah.
where you'd have, the only time you'd have the CBOC sort of in that, in the other position, and again, it'd really be the district, is if, for example, you didn't issue a report and the statute, and like the annual report, and the statute says you have to do it.
Okay,
That would be a place where I could see someone saying, you need to do what the law says you do, you didn't do it. That type of thing.
Yeah, kind of building off of that. The
Sure.
question I would have is, I think the fear that is projected towards C-Box is from you need external counsel is the concept of negligence where we miss something.
Mhm.
And it sounds like, in the past, we've heard where we could be held accountable for that. But from what you just said about kind of the annual report, like, I guess the concept of negligence for us would be not issuing the report.
Yeah.
But is there a greater risk of negligence within kind of how the CBOC operates?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, especially when it comes to, I'm trying to analogize it to something like a board, for example. Generally speaking, if you're operating reasonably, fulfilling the statutory duties, those types of things, it's very hard to show negligence of that type of thing. So I mean, I guess to your question, if there was something that was ultimately found to be illegal and the CBOC hadn't identified in the report, is there some liability for the CBOC not finding everything? I don't think so. I don't think there's any authority that says that. And to be honest, I think that would be a pretty unfair standard for CBOCs and the members of those CBOCs to be put under.
Great, thank you.
so really the CBOC's role is to simply be an oversight, just to offer friendly citizenship and, due process. Is that kind of?
I think so. And I think that, the important function that you're also is that you're here going through this information in more detail than maybe the average voter is, right? And flagging those kind of things that you think there's a concern with. And then, and we're asking questions of the district, doing all that kind of thing. And I think that that's really an oversight function as opposed to, you know, a legal enforcement type function.
Sure, but I mean, I think the devil's in the details, right? So it's very difficult to see some of this. I mean, when governments get caught for improper, spending issues, it seems to be mostly based on the contractor hiding costs into so it's, it happens all the time, and I'm just wondering, if it just makes it feel more as a check mark and a process rather than fulfilling actual taxpayer responsibility of everybody in the room's a taxpayer. This is everybody's money, not including the, everybody in the district. So, yeah, it just feels more, just.
And if I can just, but on the sort of, because I think there's kind of two types of legal questions. Is this expenditure within the bond? And then there's also, the $500 hammer type thing that you're, the statute does contemplate, and I think you might have it, independent audits. Right, that is something that's required.
Yeah.
And so I think there you've got that backstop there, and that was a place where the voters said, we want somebody outside the district to do that. So to me, that is sort of a backstop on that piece. I think when I think of what CBOCs have asked legal counsel about, a lot of times it's been, is this expenditure, we all agree, whatever that is it within the scope of the measure or not? And that's really, reading the measure, looking at what the project is and making a judgment call about, does one fit within the other? And I think that's something probably, I know a lot of CBOCs that have been able to issue reports saying one way or the other on that, without getting into the legal details.
Okay, so you said that you're aware of other CBOCs. Okay, so have you ever been in a situation where there has been an issue that's arose and the conflict that's arose between the committee and the district or the community? Have you ever had to go to court? I mean, do you know of a?
It's, I mean, there's definitely issues between the community and the district and ending up in court over whether something is an expenditure within the bond funds. That is definitely, I'm thinking if I've been involved in one personally, but there's plenty of cases where that has definitely happened. Where somebody says you built this project and that wasn't in the measure, you can't do it, that kind of a thing, and the court ultimately decide what the answer to that is.
Okay, so then in that kind of a scenario, they had a committee and the committee approved it?
I'd have to go back and look at the particular cases to see what the committee, but I don't remember the committee's role
Okay, so-
being central to whatever the court had to say about
Okay,
it.
so hypothetically, we
Yeah.
approve.
Yep.
And then the community takes it and sues and we approved it. Where do we stand on that?
Yeah, and I guess I would,
Use
think-
the word approve.
yeah, I
We-
think I was
yeah,
gonna say, I don't know that
not
approve
approved.
is, I
Okay.
mean, what you did is you would have approved a
accepted it
report
and
that
we
said,
approved the
we think
report.
it's, yeah. The short answer is I think you're not really part of that proceeding. That becomes the taxpayer and the district in front of a judge, and the judge is gonna look at the measure language and the statutes and figure
Other,
out,
it would look bad for us that we didn't
Oh.
catch it. Okay,
perhaps,
I
yeah.
mean, something that shows your good report, see?
So I think, I didn't want to cut you off
No,
there.
go ahead.
Okay, so my concern is not about being sued or
Yeah.
liability. My concern is legal advice in carrying out our duties. So as a reminder, one of our duties is ensure that bond revenues are expended only for the purpose described in blah, 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 and we know what that is. So my concern is something appears before us and we're not sure whether it complies or does not comply. We're ready to write our report. Two committee members say, clearly it complies, and two say, clearly it does not comply. Now we'd like to get a third party to look at the code, the law, and come back and render an opinion to help us decide whether to vote that it does or it doesn't, and then put it in our report. That's our only duty, to put it in the report, but we have to, agree on the report. So we want some advice. Simply, we want advice to carry out our duties. And you're suggesting that we would go to you for that advice, correct?
Yeah.
As the technical
District.
support from the district. Oh, thank you, Siri. We would go to you.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
you have, or may have already rendered advice to the
Mhm.
district that this is a legal expense and it can be accrued to the bond.
Yep.
You don't see a conflict there in advising us as well on that?
no, because ultimately, we're still representing the district. We're providing you technical assistance under that duty from the district. So no, we don't have, if, what I said about those rules of professional responsibility, if we had a duty, independent duty to the CBOC and an independent duty to the district, that's where we have the conflict. But what I'm saying is that ultimately, we remain, much as any other district staff is here to provide district technical assistance, we'd be, I mean, almost a way to think about it is assume that a district had in-house general counsel and they were providing that information, it sort of would be that same type of situation.
It just appears to be, because this is the oversight committee, to be a conflict for you to have advised the district that this is a legal expense and then to advise us that potentially it isn't a legal expense.
And I think, I guess.
Which you wouldn't do. You would advise us that it was legal because that's what you told the district and your
Yeah, and
your
I think,
fiduciary responsibility is to them,
yeah,
correct?
and I think, again, I think the word advise is where I would take issue. I think what we would come and provide information about why we believe it's legal. I don't think we would say independent opinion, we think it's legal or not. That's the distinction.
And so if we wanted to get a second opinion, let's say, you don't see any issue in the statute about saying, hey, we asked the district to get us a second opinion. That would be technical support as well.
No, I don't think, I think because the district doesn't, there's nothing providing that you get to have a second opinion essentially. But if that's what the code wanted, I think it would say that. And again, we run into all the same issues about having independent counsel when you do that. Both from the conflict and there's no statutory provision that talks about that. I mean, there's a question about public funds. I don't think it would be a gift to public funds, but there's, the idea of a district paying to have somebody say that something they're doing illegal starts to sound like a questionable
Yeah,
expenditure.
that's the root of the whole question right here.
So.
Absolutely.
So in that case, could we then have him do his presentation as to why? We can still have our conversation and we could still agree to disagree on the committee. And when you write the report, you say committee may have passed it, but 4 for, 2 against. And this is why we got a presentation from the district council and our decision was blah, blah, blah. And you just have to be very clear in the reporting out process on that case. I
Yeah.
would say that's on us to make sure we're reporting
I
out.
agree with that.
Yeah, I think we just have
And
to
I
be
think
clear.
you have a minority report provision in the bylaws, right,
Yeah.
that calls that out.
And I think he also mentioned though that we could use the district funds if we had to get an independent attorney as well. It's just that we would be using funds to do that process, right? But I agree. I think if it's up for a vote and it goes 4-2 or something and people say nay, then mark it in the report as it was not unanimous and it was an important point. I think basically the point is mark everything in the report that's controversial or where we really feel like there's an impropriety, or even if we're not sure.
At the end of the day, the voters want to know we're doing our job, paying attention to the dollars and to what the bond measure has spelled out and what is allowed to be spent. So that's our job to see that it gets done. And if we question that, that's still our job to question it. And then having the council come before us, we can agree to disagree with you. You can answer our questions, but not necessarily tell us how to vote, just tell us, I guess how you feel about it, but we can still vote our way. It's not, you can clarify, but.
And I think it might be helpful because I forgot this point from the bylaws. So William, thank you for bringing it up. There is section 6C says reports of minority viewpoints of the committee are allowed. All such minority viewpoint reports must be reviewed by the committee and be faithfully articulated to the public by the designated minority spokesperson. To avoid the need for minority reports, due diligence should be pursued to resolve divisive issues during the review process, thereby attaining fullest possible committee support for the content of the report. So in my hypothetical, 2 people could say, we just don't agree this is legal. We're going to write a minority report and publish it, and it would be allowed under the bylaws.
Yep.
All right, thank you for bringing that. Thank you for coming this evening, sharing your views, allowing us to pepper you with lots of questions, pointing to something in the bylaws I had forgotten about, so very helpful.
Of course, happy to be here.
Any other questions? Okay, we're closing out item 5.1. 5.2, turning our attention to Measure S now, and progress and update on the facilities master plan process, which if you didn't happen to catch the board meeting last night, there was a presentation. I don't know if you're planning to talk to the same thing this evening. Okay.
Yes, I will give an update on that, but if you wanted to provide any comments.
No, just my only comment was that it was presented to the board last night as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer Gibb, Program Manager for Measure S. We have been working on a couple things since last time we met. The board had approved a financial system for Measure S, so that has been implemented, and we're working in the background to reconcile that with the district system. And so at a future bond oversight committee meeting, we'll be able to bring the reports as presented with expenditures through that system. So that's an update on our financial system. The next is the our current projects that we are working on. So the district's done a lighting assessment. Those are complete, and we'll be bringing, staff will be bringing options for procuring those improvements in the September board meeting. Power studies are being done in regards to the availability of all existing sites as we look forward to doing the HVAC upgrades at the district-wide. And then we're also continuing to review for additional quick starts. An item that was brought up at the board meeting last night, for those of you that attended and or watched, was doing some HVAC improvements. So we are looking at that as, again, a quick start project. We're doing the electrical assessments as well as working for an HVAC solution. Another opportunity is window tinting as we look for even a quick start, right? So that's something that we're going to be working with staff to implement in the next coming weeks to limit and or try to reduce additional heat in our classrooms. So that's for our active projects. In regards to the master plan,
Do you want to take questions at
oh,
the
yes.
end or as
I
you
can
go?
take questions however you'd like.
So I think one of the topics that came up last night at the board meeting, which is appropriate for this committee, is as you referred to, some temporary measures, maybe window tinting or a portable fan or whatever for cooling. All great. And the question was asked, I think last night, would that be a bond expense? And someone mentioned, well, we wouldn't want to put in a new HVAC unit in a building that 2 years from now we're going to tear down once we get the facilities master plan, and then we decide, okay, that building's going to be replaced. So my question here is, how are you determining what's a bond expense versus what's an operating expense as you talk about these short-term measures?
Correct. So we'll be working with staff in regards to, as we're doing that in concert with the facilities master planning process, right? We've done our condition assessment. So we've done several things that we are understanding our opportunities in the placement of full facility replacement versus modernization. And we'll just be working through that process as we, quick as we go through this process.
So just maybe to put a finer point on the question, whose job is to decide if it's a operating expense or a bond expense? Anybody can answer.
Yeah, absolutely. It is working with the district and our consultants through the master planning process to identify those needs. And then if it's aligned in our facilities master plan as a Measure S project, then that would be the replacement of the unit would be under the bond. If it's a temporary solution, or related to Measure S, again, it could be paid for out of the bond. Those are all things that we're going to be utilizing the master planning process to determine whether or not it's a operations or capital expenditure.
You wanna?
You're comparing it to the facilities master plan, which you're finalizing now. And you're taking that into consideration. So an example would be this building is gonna come down in 2 years, but you want to do something. You're not saying you won't do it. You're just saying it's being considered.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, oh,
I was gonna say, I'm assuming though that you might put in a temporary movement pool or something in that location until, HVAC was decided, if that building is coming down.
correct. That's what I was just going to say. There will be an assessment. Sites will be prioritized with whether it's, within the first month, first year, next 5 years, regarding the condition of those units, and then taking into consideration if the physical facility will be replaced, new or modernized. And then also there are those temporary solutions, and then those units, sometimes depending on the contract and the way we work with our new teams, some of those units are reusable. So it's not for waste, but that is all part of the planning process. I can't tell you today exactly what sites district-wide would have, yes, we're going to give them new units. Yes, we're going to give them a temporary unit and or a unit that would then be used on the new building. But that's something that we're working forward with.
Just a clarification. So I don't want to jump to your conclusion, but I think from watching the board meeting last night, the facilities master plan finalization is in the January, February timeframe. So I guess my question, even more pointed, is if in 2 weeks from now you decide to spend some money on HVAC, it won't be aligned with the master plan because it's not done. So how will you make a decision whether it's a bond expense? Or Rick, do you want to just jump in on this?
Yeah. So I think one thing that, and I know Carl was watching last night, Mike happened to be there too, and John, is the point made, or the big point made last night, is HVAC is not going into this district anytime soon, right? The full scale HVAC implementations, looking at school sites, it's a multi-year project to do this, right? So if we're lucky, we might be at the last night we said 3 schools. We'd be lucky if we're at 2, maybe we're at 4, if things work out perfectly for next summer, not for October, not for December. There are some, so that'll happen with, like I said, 2 to 4 schools.
And those are clearly bond improvement projects
Those are
planned
bond
out
improvement
years in
process.
advance, and
But those 2 or 4, then we'll have 4 or 5 more the following summer, and 4 or 5 more the following summer after that. So when we look at HVAC as a whole, we're looking at a 4 to 6 year process in order to address the needs at all of our school sites. For a number of reasons. One, the size and scope of projects, the short window in the summer now, right? We only have 60 odd days with no students or staff on campus, right? We have a lot of campuses that are used during the summer, so we'll have displacement of those campuses when those go there. So there's a lot of moving parts to take into account where, yes, we want HVAC as soon as possible, but that's not in the near term. What we're talking about with some of this is doing work on buildings for mitigation of heat that we can do quickly, right? One was the window tint or the film, that type of thing. There was discussions of painting the asphalt white. I mean, a number of ideas came out last night that can be implemented sooner, right? And so we'll have to look at those on a case-by-case basis, on a classroom-by-classroom basis. If we have a classroom that never exceeds 65 degrees right now because of the big oak tree that's shading it all day, we're probably not going to focus any time or energy on there, but we will focus on the classroom that gets up to 89 on a regular basis, right? So we're going to have to pick and choose. Martin and his team, along with VPCS, along with QKA, are going to have to go and evaluate some of these rooms, one based on what we know as a district, to what we hear from teachers and students and staff to go and address certain rooms, to make this a plausible project now where there's benefit now. So some of those temporary solutions might be there for 5+ years before that school is actually air conditioned ready, right? And others will be sooner than that. And that's the work with Jen and QKA and the facilities master plan team We haven't thrown out the 2015 master plan. It's still there. So we have a semblance of that as we start the planning for the new master plan that will be done in phases across the next 5 to 6 months. And so we'll know that at school X, I'm not going to name a school because somebody will hold me to it tonight, that we're going to put a new 2-story building there, and we expect construction to start in the next 12 months, let's say. We're not going to go and put new HVAC units and new roof on that building, but we may use some mitigation measures for heat in the interim, because we're going to go through, and the rest of this, we're going to go through the spring, summer, and potentially up to another year before that construction project starts. So we're taking all that into account in the planning. We are, as was mentioned last night, we are going to test this on some rooms immediately and come back with some more options for.
So not to
the board
cut you off,
to
but
go
how is
forward.
the accounting gonna be done? That's what I'm asking. The accounting.
Well, well,
So let's say you put window film on
Yeah.
a building that'll be torn down next year. You already know in the facilities master plan, it's gonna be torn down in a year or two, but you need to put window film on because it's too hot in the classroom. Get it, totally, makes sense, let's do it. How do you account for that? How do
it
you
would
decide
depend.
how to account for that?
Well,
I
we would
guess,
have
yeah.
to look at that once the project's before us.
Okay.
Right. Right now, I can't say there will be construction at that site in 12 months. That was just an example right now. And we'll look at that in coordination with our facilities team, and we'll charge appropriately.
But there's no set rule in place for this is gonna be an operating expense versus this is gonna be a bond expense.
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
Well, there are rules, I mean, about how operating expense versus capital versus bond expense, but you're saying there aren't any guidance yet established for,
Right. but
for
it's
the
still
measure S.
But it's still for the upgrade or modernization of a building.
Yeah.
Even if it were 2 years away from being replaced, right? So we'll take that into account as we're doing this.
Yeah, that was my only question is like, who's making the accounting decisions? Because ultimately we'll be reviewing those accounting decisions somewhere down the line.
But Carl, they think they spent like 1.5, whatever it was, 2 million on the old Orion facility, which they no longer own, but they were obligated to by the district because they own the facilities. I mean, though there's no students out of our district, out of our taxpayers that are, they still had to maintain the facility. So there might have been painting that was part of the original map. They might not have done the full-blown plan, but they did have to do a minimum amount, I believe, to maintain. So your question is very valid. I agree. I know what
My
you're
question
asking.
is simply
Your
about the
question is
process.
simply,
Yeah.
if they got to paint the roof white, who's paying for the paint? And is that coming out of the district budget, or is this going to come out of bond funds? I understand your
Yeah,
question.
that wasn't
but
even my question. My question was who decides which fund it comes from?
I think, yeah.
It'll be a recommendation from the district to the board, and the board will make the ultimate decision on the payment of it.
In normal governance.
Right.
So before we go any
Oh.
further, Olivia, could I get you to get me help? I shut my computer down. Sorry, I wanted to
Yes.
say my.
Sorry to derail you, Jennifer, but were there any other questions about before you're going to talk about the facilities master planning process next, correct? Any other questions about Jennifer's update before we move to that portion? Okay, fire away.
And you're not derailing. I'm at the pleasure of the committee, so happy to answer any questions, and those are definitely important. So for the master planning process, let me just tell you what we've done to date. The teams, QKA, Van Pelt, and the maintenance and operation teams walked all of the sites, evaluating them for overall condition, building infrastructure, finishes, restrooms, all the counts, toilet count, all of those types of things, condition of the infrastructure, accessibility, parking, drop off, pickup, playgrounds, fields, and then any other opportunities that were of note, as Rick mentioned, if the school site has an opportunity that they note maybe in the maintenance work order system, that we're aware of that. And we've also done solar array location identifications and potential opportunities and or challenges with future positioning of master planning. So we've looked at those as well. We had our first educational specifications meeting on the 20th of August with the leadership team. And then we've been working on planning each individual site committee meeting with the site committees that are established at those sites. So that's what's to come. We'll be working with the school site administration and then their formed site committee representative of their school and school community to have meetings with the master planning team, our team, and district staff to garner input in regards to the needs and or opportunities they see at their site. We'll be doing that over the next month. And in that, we will also be working with them on the educational specifications of how they utilize their space to teach the students, right? The pedagogy. So we're working on that. Will be coming out. You'll be seeing a survey as well, not only to the site community, but also to the community at large. That will be available and be sent out via all social media and or district website, any opportunity that the district's communication team can get out, working with local paper, et cetera. We'll also be having open forums for the community at large, not just the school community, because it's important to the board through this process that we also get input from all of our constituents. So those will be held in person and via Zoom at both different times so that we can make sure that if you aren't available to attend in person, you can jump on the Zoom. So that's kind of where we're at right now in the master planning process. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I did have one question real quick. Are you using the same architects that were used for Measure T master site planning? So it all starts from scratch.
We are not using the same architects, so it is starting. This team is new, but we're not starting from scratch. We're able to use all of our as-built, so our DSA approved plans. We have that. We have the old master plan documents. We have the current work that was done with Measure T and any input that was provided between the master plan and now with surveying and work order systems from the maintenance and operation team. So it's not from scratch, but this team is getting all that together and we're producing a new master plan based off of the data that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question?
I
I
do.
have one, but
Really quick, when are the open forums supposed to be?
They're still to be announced. So as soon as they are, I'm sure that staff will send that out to the oversight committee as well so that you can participate in that. Yes.
beyond the expenses for obviously your work and the facilities master plan architect, have there been any other Measure S expenses?
There have not been that I'm aware of.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jennifer?
What architecture firm was?
Quattrochi Quack Architects. They're in our qualified pool that the board adopted, and then they also were solicited from that pool the opportunity to submit a proposal. So they submitted through that and were the most qualified that the board ended up adopting.
And I would add that if you want to see the QKA, is that their? Yeah,
Correct.
if you want to see the presentation that they gave to the board last night, the meetings are on the district YouTube channel. So I would recommend, if you want to hear more about it directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the person from QKA presented last night.
There are no drawings. There are
They-
no drawings.
It was a
yet.
drawing. You were not the winner of the drawing, though, unfortunately. Someone else got the. Okay, great. Anything else on Measure S? Any questions from the committee? Okay, moving into 5.3 then. Progress report on Measure T. We're back to Measure T now. Closing out any projects on Measure T. I don't see Will here this evening, so Rick, are you gonna speak to that,
I
or
can speak to
Martin?
it.
Okay, Martin,
Yeah, I
Great.
can speak to it.
thank you.
Yeah. So, right now, currently they're working on the final closeout with the district-wide energy management system and the security. That's one. The next one would be the working on reporting and auditing of the state funding program. And the last one would be the solar 2 phase. Still working through their procurement phase. The RFP has been completed and responses, evaluations, and interviews. There was a selected design build contractor and currently working through contract negotiations for that. That's it.
Okay.
Very much it.
Where is solar 2 phase? Who gets that?
Ooh,
Where will
Who's-
that go?
With,
What is the
with
scope of
sites,
solar?
you mean?
Here.
oh, so we did 4 on phase 1,
Uh-huh.
and then the remaining would be minus a couple, depending, we're still working on the design to see, but the rest of the campuses. Yeah.
So will all of our buildings eventually have solar? Is that what the,
Not the buildings, but on the buildings themselves, but there would be standalone arrays. Yeah,
To
to
feed the
offset
facilities.
the facilities.
offset the facilities? So do any of our new ones, like TAF is a new build, do they currently have something like that?
No.
Interesting. Okay.
All right, thanks, Martin. So that takes us to 5.4. We're going to go into Measure T now in more detail. And just as a reminder, this meeting is covering the fiscal period of April 1st through June 30th. So the last quarter of last fiscal year. And then at our next meeting, which we'll talk about shortly, we'll be reviewing the fiscal period we're in right now, which is July 1 through end of September. So we're looking back at April through June. List of bond expenditures since the last meeting is 5.4.1, but there were none. Is that correct? Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's the Excel spreadsheet, right? Okay, sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, so there was the spreadsheet sent out. There are 27 line items on the 5.4.1 attachment. Does anyone have any questions about those? You're good? Okay. Right, we can always go back, but let's move on then to 5.4.2, contractor change orders during the period. This is the one where there were none, correct? Okay, so nothing to review on 5.4.2. Takes us to 5.4.3, list of no bid contracts in the period. Anybody have questions on that one? Okay.
So I have the right sheet in front of me. Can you explain what reinstall? To me, when you reinstall something is because it didn't get installed right the first time, or it broke, or what's reinstall? Did it just expend its time and now it needs new? What?
There was
Yeah.
So it's a new system that got
It's a
installed.
new system that
Mhm.
got reinstalled.
It got reinstalled. Yeah. So I think there was a glitch, and
And we had to
Need it.
pay for it?
what's that?
We had to pay for it? I mean, if there was a glitch in it, was there something broke? I'm just,
No,
I
not.
did it, Martin.
Okay.
No, I won't say there was a glitch. There was uh, application in a server that was having issues. Part of the troubleshooting and work that was done made it necessary to reinstall that and reprogram not only the server, but many of the endpoints as well, in order to have communication between that server and our school sites. And so the labor and time to do that was really what we're paying for with Siemens.
It wasn't a warranty item or.
that's just what I was asking.
It wasn't a warranty item.
And it wasn't something that was defective at the beginning?
No.
From the beginning, okay, okay. I just know that if I have to reinstall something because it broke too soon, then I go back to the manufacturer and say,
Things very similar to a computer getting corrupted and they have to reinstall the
Got it.
operating system and then have to reprogram endpoints to assist with that.
Yeah, there's mostly software, so fairly common. So they just,
you said that, I was like, okay, okay, yeah. Thank you.
A few questions for me. What's print services, ARC? What printing are we talking about? Does anyone know?
Arc, they plot full
They
scale
do-
drawings,
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's the
like
blueprints.
architectural blueprints.
They go from the original to a database where we can access them, or they get into being able to access them.
Are you also
Okay.
getting record drawings right now?
We have drawings, record.
But that $6,000, is that for,
Is
you're
that,
probably doing a lot of closeout and record drawings right now.
Mhm.
Is that kind of getting your bookshelves.
Mhm.
Just as part of closeout.
for a closeout?
Okay, my next question is the obvious one on here, which is a 540,000, otherwise known as $500,000 contract for Sage that was not bid. Can you explain that one?
That was a professional services contract for the solar, the work done previous to bidding the solar project out and as a design build project. We enlisted the help of Sage. And as part of that contract, we chose to go with them, and they're helping us through the securing of the contractor for solar project phase 2.
And can you remind us why for a professional services contract, you don't have to bid that even though it's a $500,000?
Yes, Jen, do you have a quick answer on that? For the professional services.
Did they do phase one?
It's more about the dollar value. It's kind of surprising to see.
Benchmark price from phase one, right?
It's phase 1 as well.
So is the pricing similar to what it was for phase one?
Depending on, for professional services, if they were, already went through a qualification process, they're able to utilize the qualifications. If they were, secured in phase 1, then phase 2, they were already qualified, as part of the total scope, and they could be utilized for those services, just with a no bid request for proposal.
And when was it?
An example would be our architectural services. We have a pool, they've already been qualified. We so can choose to just ask for one proposal from the qualified team, or you can ask for them from everyone.
With no dollar limit.
With no dollar limit, correct, under professional services.
But hopefully you could figure out fair pricing based on that previous work.
Correct.
Similar scope, yeah.
so you could take multiple bids or multiple POs from different companies. You could still solicit multiple bids, correct? Yeah.
Correct, yes.
But to make sure that that company X is not screwing you over, would you typically do that?
Or in other words, how would the taxpayer know that somebody else couldn't have done it for $400,000?
So, if I'm not familiar with this project,
get
as
it.
it's
This is
not
Measure T,
Measure
so it's
T,
not-
but,
yeah.
as
This
it
is a
relates.
hypothetical.
Correct. As it relates to specific scopes of work, I'm seeing that this is for solar energy. If it's a phase 2 of energy and we already have a phase 1 of energy, continuity between the two is incredibly important as it's a system of our district. And so we wouldn't be having two designs, two management for separate site system or district-wide, excuse me, for one overall system. If we were going to design a completely separate building that wasn't related to a district-wide system, I would say you would go out and get multiple quotes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when was phase 1? When did Sage do phase 1?
Before I was there.
That was started in 2016. They started. I believe so.
What's that?
2016.
2016.
Yeah.
So they were qualified in 2015 or
Yeah,
2016,
I'm not too sure, Carl.
Some-
I was- I
but in
wasn't
that
part of that, but I'm
timeframe.
assuming yes.
let's say 8 to 10 years ago. And you needed to do phase two. They were already qualified from 8 to 10 years ago. They said we can do it for $500,000 and the board approved it. And did you ever consider asking for a quote from someone else?
I can't answer that.
No. No, I mean, I might be wrong, Carl, on the time, because I'm now just coming back to me as we're talking right now. It might have been later. But no, we didn't. I mean, like Jen mentioned, just keeping the continuity between, and then them knowing our district and helping us with phase one. You continue to help us with so many projects throughout the district, not only for the solar, but also for some of the charging stations.
Got it. I think, and I'll bring this up in 5-7, but I think a good agenda topic for this committee for a future meeting would be for us to get a refresher from an expert on when districts can have no bid contracts, to what level and under what conditions, so that we make sure as we're reviewing this, we're all coming from the same point. Because I'm unclear, like what does the ed code say? Like when can you, how much? Phase two, if it was 10 years ago that you did phase one, is that contractor still qualified that we've talked about? Probably yes. I just would love to get a refresher on the whole topic.
Yeah, and actually, they're still helping us wrap up some of the. They've been a great help with us with our charging stations, for example, at facilities.
I mean,
Awesome.
typically you go with your approved vendors list, but once the approved vendors are working with you, it does make it easier to continue to work with them. But
I get that, but-
as working in sales, I'll be honest with you, that's when inflation from account managers starts to trickle into, as they realize that they have a good relationship with that client and they can.
So how would the taxpayer know? Jim
So
Paul,
usually, so
that they
depends,
couldn't
sometimes,
get this for
so
400?
sometimes state agencies or some organizations will have to get multiple bids regardless. So even though company X is working with state X, agency for a while, you will still have to, that they might still cause, they make the call, but basically they would still go out and get other bids.
And when is that required?
It's not so much a requirement as it is just like a test sometimes of their current vendor list to make sure that they're still staying honest with their pricing and keeping fair and honest price.
That's the part, right? to
That's-
figure
but
out
that's up to them.
How do you know what the price check is other than like, yes.
Yeah.
100%. So that's why they'll go out and rebid it, especially if it's been a delay. Like if that vendor though might be there you've developed a trust, that's great. But if materials costs go up, right, or whatever manufacturing costs go up based on that, you do tend to go get another bid because you want to know what the fair price is as adjusted for inflation, but then also just to retest your vendors to make sure that they're dealing with you honestly.
Yeah, we just don't know if that's as.
100%. You don't
Yeah.
know. That's why I asked if they got multiple
It's,
bids regardless,
yeah.
because I
And
mean.
in this case, there weren't.
Yeah, you could be.
And when
it
I
could be
look back
screwing-
at our attachment to the,
Sorry.
to the annual report we just approved, the largest no bid contract for that whole year was $90,000. This one is 500,000. It stands out to me that why would you not get a competing bid on $500,000 worth of work? I'd like to understand what the requirements are. That's my suggestion so that we're all working from the same understanding of what does the code require in terms of no bid contracts? We don't have to argue it here.
I think the code and the requirements, I think they stated is correct, but I think
You're asking about best practice.
I'm saying best practice is to test your vendor again to make
Yeah.
sure that they,
Or
at least get another.
Or check the
But-
number, because you can go back and see what it was,
Yeah.
and you can add the inflation and the material, oh, it's there. And you can extrapolate from there, what's a fair price?
Yeah.
Depending on the time lag though, but you're right, but depending on the time lag, sometimes it's just easier to just get another bid to make sure that
Yeah.
everybody's
Some
staying.
market research would
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
done well in this scenario because, if it truly was like 8 years ago, technology has changed, services have changed.
I can't say that market research did not happen. I just don't have the information
Sure.
tonight to
Can we-
share.
can we
But
ask
I
for
think-
that for the
I
next
think
meeting,
one of
just
these
to get some
assumptions
backup
that it wasn't
information?
because there was due diligence done.
Probably, yeah.
Was there any discussion of this when it was approved at the board, Mike, the $500,000 expense?
There
You
was
recall?
discussion about the project. I can't remember if there was discussion about the particular professional services. The selection there.
Was this approved under consent or?
This would have been an action item.
It was, okay. The board date is listed here, April 3rd, so we can always go back and look and see what discussion there was, but it, Jen, were you suggesting a follow-up on this specific expense?
I almost wonder,
at a
like, is
future meeting?
it within our rights to say, and we should find out what the no bid contracts rules are, right?
Right.
But to find out, like, if something comes in for over 100K and a no bid, the committee probably wants to see backup. Is that fair to like have to see? Can we request?
Well, you can ask for, the district provides technical support for any question that you have or the
Mhm.
committee has.
Like, maybe that's just something when we see the no bid contracts for the quarter to say, we'd like to see the backup on those higher price items. For
All right.
transparency.
I'll note that and we can talk about it in 5.7 if we want to add that to the next agenda.
Yep.
I'll just note it as the Sage no bid contract. Okay. Good discussion there. Any other questions on the no bid list from that period? Okay, that takes us to 5.4.4, which is the new projects and spending approved. Any questions on the new projects? And as we see, two of the projects are on both lists. They were new and
Yeah,
and
they were
not
both.
bid. Yeah.
I just have a question just for my own sake. I'm sorry, what is a clock speaker? Is that,
So it's a.
Don't have in here.
Yeah, so those were installed with Measure T throughout the district. It's clock and then it has an intercom. And one was missed at one of the campuses.
so it actually tells you what time it is?
Yes.
I like that.
Tells you when there's a fire.
I like that. That's great. And you missed one at McKinley, and that's $9,000 for that. Wow. And worth it for, you know, someone in the class who may have visual impairment, you know, or that's,
Just to correct one thing,
What?
it doesn't say the time. It's just a clock and a speaker next to it. So it can be an intercom
It's
for
digital.
but
announcements.
it
So
can be
and it-
digital.
it is
Okay,
digital.
And
okay,
it's just,
got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
got
I didn't
it,
want you to
okay.
have the wrong
I
impression. that
did,
it
I
speaks the
did.
time.
I
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
speaker on it.
Cause
I
I've
was
seen
like,
them.
They should be able to talk. That is really something that's needed in our classrooms, is a clock that will tell the time. Sorry.
You gotta go to
Yeah,
one of the master plans,
I know, I
community
will. I
sessions and
will.
suggest
I
that.
will.
Absolutely.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a
Thank you
great
for
question though, for clarification.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
The list gets shorter every time of Measure T activity, as it should. Okay.
Yeah.
5.4.5, any current litigation or disputes related to Measure T? None. Okay. That takes us to 5.5, otherwise known as the Erica Show. And we're gonna go through the financial update on T and S. It's the floor is yours, Erica.
Is the funds, income and expense summary. It presents the actuals for each fiscal year from the beginning of the program. The revenue for fiscal year 23-24 has been updated with the fourth quarter interest revenue of 14,890. And the expenditures, the total revenue is 93,376.05. And then the total expenditure for Fund 21 is 2,045,290. The total Actual for all the funds. 236,486,427.
I have a question on this, but any other questions on this one? Is this a report that you generate from software, or is this an Excel spreadsheet that you maintain? Okay.
Based on those numbers, we update this spreadsheet.
Got it. So my request is, could you add some fields to this? I would love to know what the bond program balances are at the end of each fiscal period. You can calculate it, but I think it'd be great if you could just show it here, because I always have to do the math to figure out,
Yep.
like, well, how much is left? You have to,
Actually, it was like the 4.2 billion.
okay, so 4 point. But I'd love it if you could just, going forward, just include that on your report that we get quarterly. It would be great. Then I don't have to do the math. It's right there. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good.
Anything else on on A?
All right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Is the report from accountability system. So this is the consolidated projected cost report. And this report shows the total cumulative actual of all funds. Look at page 10, it shows that.
Are you in the audit now for last fiscal year or not yet? What's your rough timing on March you complete? When do you start usually?
Probably middle.
Okay. Are these the final numbers for the fiscal year then, or it could still adjust?
There might be very.
Okay, but you're considering this to be, it's done and closed. Okay, thank you.
Is 5.5D, measured resources and budgets report. This one shows the total budget for all funds broken down by object codes. The total budget is the $215,033,292.
Is this a new one? I don't,
No, I always.
okay. Maybe it was just it was spread over more pages maybe before or something. It's easier to review this one in this format. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I tried, I eliminated those columns that it was no number in it.
Okay,
So it's easier to review. So I didn't include those.
got it. Okay, thanks. Any questions on D? Okay.
The next one is 5.5E. This is regarding measure S. This is a report from the district financial system. And it shows this is a board report. It shows the actual interest for last fiscal year is 3.2 million. And the expenditures, it's 1.2 million. We had some DWK legal expenses, the accountant's salary, mobile modular, some key analytics expenses,
BPCS, copier leads, QKA, and Bay Area News Advertising.
So I think we, so this is helpful. This is for Measure S, obviously. It may have been my mistake of not asking you specifically for the list of Measure S expenses. So we got the spreadsheet for Measure T, but we didn't get the spreadsheet for Measure S, which would back up the 1.3 roughly million of expenditure in S in this period. You just verbally
Yes.
went through them. So
because we are not recording accountability, so I don't have that. I would not have the same report as we have for Measure T. And I think in the future, we want to use the Key Analytics financial system.
but somewhere you have written down what the expenses were for Measure S because you
Yes,
just
yes.
described them.
Yes, from the district financial system.
Okay, because you start supplying
Yeah.
those in the next.
But it doesn't have descriptions, so it would not be helpful.
By the next meeting, the key analytics system should be producing the CBOC reports that
Okay.
would highlight similar to what accountability does on the other reports.
Okay.
Okay.
So could you just go through, so in this period for Measure S, 1.285 million was spent, right? We can see it here, classified salary. So how are you apportioning, that's the bond accountant, otherwise known as Erica, right? How are you apportioning her between, sorry, her salary and benefits between S and T? Because she shows up under T as well.
Right, it's a small portion that's transitioning.
So we adjusted the budget. We had only 45,675 for a budget for last fiscal year, and I just adjusted the whatever was spent exceeded that amount. We just send it to Measure S. As a measure, we carry it to Measure S expenditure.
Okay, and how is it being accounted for this fiscal year? Is it all
So
going to be
it's
under
all
Measure S?
It's all under
Measure
one.
S this fiscal year, okay. And then could you just, the big one here is the 1.2 million on capital outlay. Could you just tell us again what's in that? Wouldn't mind?
It's BPCS services, program management, and QKA.
The architect?
Yes.
Okay.
And the Key Analytics
Software?
software.
Accounting software?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Any questions on the Measure S report?
There isn't currently a set budget because we don't have a set plan, right? In terms of like where all the buckets would go. So, but in theory, once that's set, we could see those numbers and compare them to what the allocated budgets are for each, right?
Correct. Oh, go ahead, Rick. Okay, correct. As we are implementing key analytics, we have the first issuance, and then we have the approved contracts for said services, QKA, Van Pelt, and key analytics as of right now. Then once the implementation plan is created from the master plan, we will then have an identified allocation, just like you have with Measure T. So that will be input into the system when you see the next report at your next meeting. If it's prior to the adoption of the master plan, we'll put whatever budgets that have been approved by the board for those encumbered projects. You'll be seeing that in there, but you will see a significant balance of unbudgeted because we don't have the master plan.
Can I ask, is that per the 90 million? We'll only see that stretch. How do you get the bonds issued after that? Funds back issued from the 298? Is that annually or would those funds would you get another 90 million in 2 years, 3 years? Sorry, I don't understand that process.
Yeah, it would depend, Paul, on how fast we expend the first $90 million and then the projects that we have lined up. So we'll do cost planning along with the facilities master plan. We'll take available resources that we have at that moment and we'll extrapolate those out against those projects. determine the life cycle of those projects, and then we'll work with our financial advisors and VPCS to determine when the next tranche will be sold, to keep projects rolling and always have cash on hand.
All right. Anything else under 5.5? Questions for Erica? Thank you, Erica, as always, appreciated. 5.6, we have vacancies. I believe I'm correct in saying that we have one vacancy to fill to just get us back to the required 7 members per our bylaws. And we also have 2 mandated positions that need to be filled now, the taxpayer representative and the business association representative, which I don't think we've ever filled, or at least has been vacant for a couple of years. So Rick, please let us know what's happening to get the committee back to its legislatively required number of members.
Well, I think there's 2 things there, Carl. I think one, you need 7 members as a requirement of the CBOC that have very distinct roles on the CBC, and we have 1 additional that would not have to fill one of those roles. So I think the 7 is true, but we're really looking for the 7 that fulfill the 7 roles as mandated. Unfortunately, we did have the resignation in July of our Taxpayers Association member. To this point, we've not been able to fill either of those. We are looking though, as Jen was alluding to, with the Facility Master Plan Committee meetings coming up, starting on the 5th. We're also going to use that as an opportunity to talk about all of the opportunity of coming here once a quarter and looking at the Facilities Master Plan as it relates to the overall bond program and Measure S and the completion of Measure T. So we'll be using that as also another opportunity to solicit potential people. To this point, through the efforts made, we have not had any new applicants for the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee.
And what were those efforts, if you don't mind sharing?
Just to reach out, the conversations, the places that Dr. Baker goes to and talks to various groups, and it might not always be priority 1, but I know he's mentioning it to them. And then the reach out and conversations that we have on a day-to-day basis, even with employees who may know somebody. We have made larger sweeps previously, but with no applications in over 2 years now.
Just got a text like an hour ago for the Area 3 trustee. We need that on CPUC. They all blast. There you go.
Yeah,
I was gonna say that the mailer that came out for us was very charming and I felt very important or wanted as a member of my community. So I just wondering if that mailer ever went back out to the rest of the community. I don't know if anybody else got a letter, but I got a letter. It made me feel very important. So that's how I signed
I don't know what you're referring to.
I received a letter from the district. Did you get a letter? Yeah, saying, can you submit a resume, blah, blah, blah. It was very effective for me.
It's not like this
Yeah.
is probably the most exciting.
This was 2 years ago. Yeah,
So-
when they were initially looking.
You were talking about recently, like,
Yeah.
did I fall off the list?
So
I noticed that a lot of people don't read emails, but when they get a letter from the district, I don't work for me. Just
No,
saying.
I work with me. I agree.
So are you familiar with this letter, Dr. Baker? You remember?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, we haven't done another one though, you're saying.
We could do that again. Or
So
we
I
could
think-
do exactly what
well-
went out tonight, because
Jen, did you get
parents do not like letters.
No, the text messages come loud and clear.
I get that loud and clear.
They don't like letters, huh? Wow,
I'd rather email.
I know everything's done email today.
So I don't think I've seen it advertised I'm a parent, obviously, so I get the peach jar flyers and there's all kinds of things. There's your superintendent's, newsletter that comes out. I don't think I've ever seen it mentioned in the time we've been looking,
It's been a
so
superintendent's.
it has been?
Yeah.
Okay.
It has been.
I like the idea, Rick. We're gonna be the
Mhm.
district will be having these community meetings, right, to gather input for
like
the,
that.
so the people who show up are already predisposed to be interested in facilities. I think it's a great idea for you to say, hey, and we have this oversight committee that's intimately involved. And so if you are passionate about this topic, like, come join this wonderful committee. It's the perfect time to see who's interested in the community.
But they also have to go on the rules too, so it makes it's not just anyone,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
right? It's
True.
specific
Well,
to
the
those
board has
specific-
requested 11 members, correct? So we have room to add people who don't fulfill, we still need to fulfill the 2, I agree, but there's also a space up to 11. Wasn't the board resolution to say we want an 11-member committee?
Thought it was reduced.
I thought it was reduced
The
to.
quorum
I have
was
to go
an
back.
The quorum was an issue.
Well, okay, so
I-
let
that's
me
a
just
good
say
idea.
that it would be great to get a bunch of people to apply, even if you disqualify them, at least you getting applications in. So pitching it during these facilities planning site council sessions is great. If you want us to mention it, I'm planning to go to the site council meeting for my school. I'm happy to mention it there. Tell everyone what a great time I'm having here.
I would post something at those meetings, even like a, whatever, 11 by 17, put a QR code on it.
Yep.
With all the information about the role and what we're looking for.
Mhm.
And Carl should talk about. how the
Well,
meeting
and you
is.
should, all of us should be
Well,
talking about
the
this well.
principals also sent out, I mean, our principal sent out emails to, I don't know if everybody got it, I have no idea about all the schools, but asking and that meeting's to discuss measure as funding, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, so, or that board, or whatever the advisory council, whatever it is per school, so.
Yeah, those people who show up likely are good targets for recruiting from.
Well, I'm wondering if we can even just get the principals to shoot out that there is a citizens board oversight committee, or have them discuss it somewhere. I'll ask our principal.
Like say the right thing though too, you like put in, like, this is what we're looking for, this is what the time commitment is. Make sure that, you know.
Yeah, I think that's super important because we've
Very
had a
important.
number of people resign, right? Saying, hey, I don't have the time to do it. So it doesn't help us to have someone come on who then leaves. Yeah.
You're right.
And there will be district representation at all of those meetings that can bring that up as part of the.
Right.
Master plan committee. It's like-
You're right.
I think, getting back to 7 is our immediate objective because the bylaws say that we need to be at 7. We don't want to be out of compliance with the bylaws. Our next meeting, which is actually the next topic, is scheduled for, anyone have it handy? December 5th? Okay. So, we've got 3 months to see if we can, for the district to see if they can get us back to 7, which would be great. Okay, so that does take us to 5-7. Our next meeting is December 5th. Anybody know now that they have a conflict, or are we still looking good for 12-5?
Good.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Okay, so now we're on agenda topics beyond the usual things, and I've noted 2 already, which I can review, but does anyone have, I know Janet has one to add as an agenda topic that she asked me to agendize for tonight and I forgot. So it'll be on for the next meeting.
And I'm not sure it needs to be after our conversation today, but, oh, I'm already on, sorry. There was a letter that went out, that was received from the grand jury, the civil grand jury report. And I was just curious, being it prefaced this committee, I was curious if we were interested in hearing about where it is in the process, because I know when it goes out, it needs to be responded to by the district. And all I'm curious is to, if it got responded to and where it is in the process. I have no feeling one way or the other on it, other than the
Just
fact
getting an
that-
update on it.
an
Yeah,
update.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
So there is, I'm looking at it here, there was a grand jury report that came out, San Mateo County. The date is roughly July, was it?
Yeah, June 26th, something.
Yeah, something like
Assessing and reporting internal controls in San Mateo County agencies and school districts. And Redwood City was one of the school districts that was mentioned in here. And I don't want to paraphrase it, but I think what Janet is saying is let's just hear what the issue was and how the district responded as the agenda.
That's
item.
it.
We don't have to pass judgment on it
No.
one way or the other.
No.
Okay, I've noted that. I also have the specific item of reviewing the Sage $500,000 solar for the next meeting. I added one here, which is for us to get a refresher training on what are the rules around no bid contracts in general for school districts. So those 3 topics. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to the next meeting agenda?
I mean, I think we'll probably get an update regardless.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
keep that on the agenda, so that will be there. Yep.
As it relates to the Sage and the no bids, potentially having like a threshold dollar amount, if there's something that goes over on the no bids to
Flag
see,
or
yeah,
something.
just to see additional backup on pricing specifically.
Okay. So separate from what might be legally required, I think you're suggesting the discussion would be about, do we want to set a threshold for reporting to the CBOC
Yeah,
when something beyond this quarterly report that we get already, you're saying, or
yeah, well, not just the dollar amount, but like.
the
Is there any like
okay,
benchmarking
got it.
pricing to validate not having competitive bids?
okay.
And maybe details around.
When we would get details, you're saying.
Yeah, like if PS was, ordered for solar, what did it entail, just generally?
And I want a clock that talks.
Oh, and a talking clock. Got it. Okay, anything else for next meeting agenda? As a reminder, we'll be covering the July, August, September time period at our December meeting. All right, I think we're done then. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Good.